First contact, first confusion. Daniel stood on the soft white surface of Valari, a planet far from Earth, surrounded by tall crystal trees that shimmered with light. The air was clean but cold, and the sky above looked like liquid silver. His boots left no prints on the ground. It was as if the planet didn't want to remember his presence. The Valerians were not hostile, not even cold. They were just distant. They spoke with precision, acted without emotion, and observed everything with silent eyes. Daniel was the only human chosen for this peaceful exchange program. His job was simple: live among them, learn their culture, and share some of his own. What he didn't expect was to be assigned a personal observer. Her name was Lyra. Lyra had smooth, pale skin with a faint glow, and her eyes were large and unblinking. She spoke clearly, almost too perfectly, and never showed signs of confusion or excitement. She was curious about Daniel, but not in a human way. She asked questions like a scientist examining a new type of insect. What do humans eat? Why do humans laugh? Why do humans touch each other so often? Daniel answered every question with patience. At first, it felt like a routine job. But soon, he noticed something different about Lyra. She didn't just ask questions. She watched closely. She listened not just to his words, but to his voice. She began to mimic small things like the way he nodded or tilted his head when thinking. One day, while Daniel was sitting outside his assigned habitat reading an old Earth novel, Lyra approached quietly and sat beside him without speaking. This was new. Valerians never sat close. He looked at her but said nothing. After a long pause, she spoke. Why do humans choose to remain close after reproduction is complete? Daniel looked at her carefully. She wasn't being rude. She was genuinely confused. Well, he said slowly, because it's not just about reproduction. For humans, it's about connection, trust, love. Being close means more than just creating life. It means sharing life. Lyra stared ahead. Sharing life. That is not a requirement for survival. No, Daniel said, but it makes survival worth it. She turned her head toward him. Explain. Daniel thought for a moment. Imagine eating the same meal every day, without taste, just for nutrition. That's enough to live. But now imagine tasting something delicious, something that makes you smile. It's not needed, but it changes the experience. That's what emotional closeness is like for us. Lyra didn't speak again that day, but she stayed beside him longer than usual. In the following days, she became more involved. She followed him to the kitchen space where he tried to cook simple Earth meals with limited ingredients. She watched as he added spices and tasted food just for enjoyment. She asked why he hummed songs while working. She watched a video he played of Earth rain, and asked why people ran into the rain instead of away from it. Each question felt deeper than the last. Not because of the words, but the tone. Lyra wasn't studying a subject anymore. She was searching for something. One evening, Daniel brought out a small music player and played a soft instrumental track. Lyra sat across from him, her head tilted slightly. This sound makes your body relax, she observed. Yes, it reminds me of home, of peaceful moments, of people I care about. Music has no purpose. It does not solve problems. Why does it matter? Because it makes you feel something, Daniel said with a gentle smile. Sometimes that's enough. That night, something changed. When Daniel turned to leave, Lyra reached out and touched his sleeve. Just for a second. Just a light touch. She pulled her hand back quickly. I apologize, she said. That was not part of the protocol. Daniel didn't move away. It's all right. Lyra stood still, unsure of what had just happened. She didn't understand why she had done it. Her heart, or whatever Valarians called the thing that beat in their chest, was moving faster. Her body temperature had shifted slightly. These were new signals. Back in her private chamber, Lyra looked into her reflection and studied her face. It looked the same. But something felt different. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. Sharing life. Feeling alive. She returned to the council the next day to submit her usual report. She gave the same kind of summary she always did. Human behavior remains unpredictable but consistent with emotional logic. No threats detected. However, before leaving, she added one sentence that surprised even herself. I believe the subject may be teaching me something beyond data. The council didn't respond. They simply recorded the report and dismissed her. Days passed. Lyra continued to spend time with Daniel. She watched him laugh at jokes only he understood. She saw how he stared at the stars as if remembering someone. She began to speak more freely, asking questions that were not on her assigned list. She asked him if he missed Earth. He said yes. She asked if he was lonely. He said sometimes. And then, carefully, she asked if being close to someone truly made that loneliness disappear. Daniel looked at her, not with surprise, but with understanding. It doesn't erase loneliness, he said, but it makes it easier to bear. Lyra didn't reply. She only nodded and sat beside him again, not for observation, not for questions, just to sit, just to be near. And for the first time, Daniel thought maybe this mission would not be about what he could learn from them. Maybe it would be about what they could feel for the first time in their lives. Curiosity turns deeper. Lyra walked through the long silver hallway of the Valerian Learning Center, her steps quiet and light, her face calm, but her mind full of noise. Thoughts moved like waves. She could not stop. They always returned to one subject. Daniel. Since their last meeting, she had not been the same. Her questions had changed. They were no longer part of a study. They were not for reports, they were for herself. She wanted to understand not just what humans did, but why they did it, why Daniel smiled when no one was around, why he stared at her with soft eyes when she was silent, why he asked how she felt instead of what she observed. That morning, Lyra entered the habitat early. She found Daniel sitting on the floor, fixing a broken communication device. Wires spread around him. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. You're early, he said gently. I wanted to ask something. Lyra replied. She sat across from him, her voice steady. Go ahead, Daniel said, still working with his hands. What is love? She asked. Daniel paused. His hands stopped moving for a moment. He looked at her, eyes full of curiosity and something else. He couldn't name. Love is a deep feeling, he said slowly. It is when you care about someone so much that their happiness becomes part of yours. It's not just physical, it's emotional. It's wanting someone to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel seen. Lyra listened without interrupting. Her eyes watched his face as he spoke. Your people speak of love often, she said, but my people say it is not useful. They believe feelings weaken logic. They say closeness brings chaos. Maybe, Daniel replied, but feelings also bring beauty, joy, strength. They make life rich, not just long. Lyra looked down. Her fingers touched the edge of her data pad, but she didn't open it. When you touched my arm that night, she said softly, I felt warmth. It was not painful, it was not needed, but it stayed with me. Why? Because a touch can carry meaning, Daniel said. Because it can speak without words. It can say you are not alone. Lyra looked at him again, this time with something different in her eyes. Not just curiosity, but quiet wonder. Later that day, Daniel showed her a short Earth film on his device. It was a simple story about two people who fall in love across time. They meet, they talk, they cry, they share pain and happiness. Lyra watched every second without blinking. When the film ended, she sat still for a long time. Do humans cry from emotion? She asked. Sometimes when feelings become too strong to hold, we do not cry, we do not share weakness. It is forbidden. Crying is not weakness. Daniel said it's release, it's truth. Next day, Lyra followed Daniel to the garden area outside the learning center. He was growing a small plant from Earth. It had bright green leaves and a single yellow flower. It was not native to Valari, but it had started to grow in their soil. It's beautiful, Lyra said. Struggled at first, Daniel replied. Different air, different light. But now it's growing. Because I gave it time. Lyra looked at the flower and then at him. Like me, she whispered. Daniel didn't answer. He just smiled. In the following days, Lyra started to change in small ways. She walked slower, she listened longer, she smiled once only slightly. But Daniel saw it and said nothing. She began to bring small items to him, things she thought he might enjoy: a local fruit, a cloth with soft texture, a drawing she made of the flower he planted. These were not part of her assignment. No one told her to do it. She just wanted to. The other Valerians noticed her change. They watched her movements, they listened to her tone, they began to speak in private. Some were concerned, some were confused, and some were afraid. One senior observer, named Marek, approached her during a report session. "You spend too much time with the human," he said coldly. "Your reports lack objectivity," Lyra replied with calm voice. "I observe more clearly now than before." Marek narrowed his eyes. "Feelings cloud truth. Sometimes feelings reveal truth," she answered. Marek did not respond. He turned and walked away, but his silence carried a warning. That night Lyra found Daniel sitting on the ground outside under the stars, his head tilted upward, his expression soft. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About Earth," he said. "Sometimes I miss it, the noise, the people, the smell of rain dew." "You miss someone there?" "Yes," he said. "A few people, family, old friends, but some are gone." "Now gone?" "Yes, passed away. We say they died." "How do you live with that?" "By remembering them, by loving others more, by not closing my heart." Lyra sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "If I disappeared, would you remember me?" she asked. "Yes, I would," Daniel replied without hesitation. "Why?" "Because you changed me too." Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was full of everything unspoken. Lyra felt something in her chest, a strange pull, not pain, not fear, something deeper, something alive. She turned to look at Daniel. He was already looking at her. "Will I ever understand?" she asked. "You already are," he said. "You just don't know it yet." For the first time in her life, Lyra wanted to reach out, not for study, not for duty, but because she felt it. She did not yet, but she stayed there beside him under the alien sky, sharing nothing and everything all at once. And Daniel knew she was learning more than language, more than culture. She was learning to feel, crossing lines. Sun on Volari never rose fast. It glowed slowly across the sky like a soft light behind silver clouds. The planet never rushed anything, and now it seemed even time itself had slowed for Lyra. Something inside her was changing like the light outside. Her emotions began to glow without warning, without reason. Daniel had become more than a study subject. He was no longer a task or a name in her reports. He had become a presence that stayed with her, even when she was alone. She remembered his voice. When she walked through quiet halls, she heard his laughter in the echo of her own thoughts. She began to feel warmth without temperature, movement without steps. One morning she went to Daniel's habitat earlier than usual. He was not working, he was simply sitting on the floor. A small light beside him, and a photo in his hand, a still image of people. Smiling faces full of life. "Who are they?" Lyra asked gently. Daniel looked up, surprised, but calm. He turned the photo slightly so she could see. "My parents and my brother. We took this photo before I left Earth. Are they waiting for you? 2 of them are gone." Now Daniel said, "Only my brother remains gone." "You said that means they died." "Yes, Lyra. Do you feel pain when you see this photo?" "Sometimes, but I also feel love. I remember the moments that mattered." Lyra sat beside him, her eyes on the photo, her thoughts spinning. "Your people hold on to pain and love both." "Yes," Daniel replied, "because they remind us we are alive." She nodded slowly but said nothing. Her hand rested near his, not touching. "Not yet." That same day they went to the walk-in garden, a quiet place with glowing stones and soft wind. Lyra walked beside Daniel, not ahead, not behind. They moved together like 2 shadows sharing the same light. "Tell me something human that is not part of your duty," she asked. "Something you feel, not something you explain." Daniel smiled. He thought for a moment, then said, "I feel afraid, sometimes afraid that when I leave you will forget all this." Lyra stopped walking. Her heart felt heavy, but soft, not fear, not sadness, something else. "Why would I forget?" she asked. "Because feelings fade when they are not shared," Daniel answered. "But I hope ours will not." They continued walking, but slower now, not because they were tired, but because every step felt important. Later, in the evening, rain began to fall for the first time since Daniel arrived. It was not a storm, but a light rain. Drops falling without sound like silver tears from the sky. Lyra had never felt rain. She looked up confused and down at her hands. The water touched her skin like soft touches from the air. She turned to Daniel, who was standing still, arms open, eyes closed, letting the rain fall on his face. "Do you enjoy this?" she asked. "Very much," he said. "It feels like the sky is alive, like it's touching us without asking anything back." Lyra stepped forward slowly, letting the rain reach her skin. She closed her eyes and tried to feel what he felt. She imagined the sky was trying to tell her something she could not hear, but only sense. Daniel moved closer, not too close, but close enough for her to feel his warmth without touching him. "You can feel too," he said softly, "if you stop trying to understand." Lyra opened her eyes. They met his. Her chest felt strange again, like something inside was trying to break free, but not to hurt her, to release her. She reached out her hand and touched his, not by accident, not by mistake. It was a choice. Her fingers wrapped around his slowly, like she had practiced it in her mind 100 times. Daniel did not move away. He looked at her hand, then at her face. He saw something in her eyes, something real, something vulnerable. "You know what this means?" he asked. "Not fully," she said, "but I want to." That night they sat together in silence, hands joined, rain falling around them. No words, no explanations, only a shared moment that felt like a beginning. The next day everything changed. The Valerian Council called Lyra to appear before them. The room was large, and cold walls, smooth and silent figures sat in a half circle, their eyes watching without emotion. "You have crossed your limits," one said. "You have allowed emotional influence." Lyra stood in the center, calm but not cold, her voice clear but not empty. "I have not lost control," she said. "I have gained understanding. You were sent to study, not to bond." Another voice echoed. "I did both," she replied. "I learned more through feeling than through logic." "You have damaged your objectivity." "No," she said, "I have expanded it. I now see what we were missing." There was silence, no agreement, no anger, only pause. "You are no longer fit for this assignment," said the final voice. Lyra nodded. She had expected this, but she did not feel regret, only clarity. When she left the chamber, she did not go back to her room. She walked straight to Daniel, who was waiting outside. His face already told her he knew. "So this is goodbye," he said. "For now," Lyra replied. "I must return to Central Command. I will be questioned more, but I am not afraid." He looked into her eyes and asked, "Then, what will happen next?" "I do not know," she said, "but I know what I felt was real, and that is something I will not forget." Daniel stepped forward. Slowly he reached out and placed his hand gently on her cheek. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch like it was the only thing holding her steady. They stood like that for a long moment. Then she pulled back just enough to speak. "Thank you for showing me what my world could never explain." "Thank you," Daniel said, "for seeing what others chose to ignore." As she turned to leave, her steps were slow but strong, her heart full not of answers, but of truth. She did not cry, not yet, but something inside her had shifted forever. And Daniel stood there in the soft air, watching her disappear into the distance, knowing that something between them had crossed a line that no council could erase. Defiance and discovery. The city center of Valari was quiet under the soft evening glow. Towers stood like glass needles reaching into the sky, and the streets hummed with low-energy light. Lyra walked through them, not as an observer, not as a follower, but as someone who had seen a world beyond her own. She was no longer the same. Her eyes held questions but not fear. Her heart held emotions but not confusion. Inside the central hall, the commanders waited, tall figures dressed in silver robes, their faces calm, their minds sharp. They asked her to sit in the middle of the circle. Their voices began one after another, each more serious than the last. "You were trained to resist emotional influence. You formed a connection that was not authorized. You crossed a limit between observer and subject. You must explain." Lyra sat straight. Her voice did not shake. Her hands remained still. She looked at each face and spoke, not with defense, but with clarity. "I was sent to study humans. I did so with care and attention. But what I found was something our teachings never prepared me for. I found depth in their emotions, meaning in their actions, beauty in their weakness, and strength in their feelings." One of the commanders spoke. "Feelings are unreliable, they change like wind. They lead to mistakes, Lyra replied. Perhaps they do, but they also lead to truth, to growth, to understanding. Another voice echoed, how can you prove your connection was not manipulation? Because I chose it freely. I was not told, I was not ordered, I followed my own will, and that is what makes it true. Room became silent for a moment. Nothing moved, not even the light. You are dismissed from the exchange program, another voice said. You will return to your sector for evaluation. Lyra nodded. She expected this decision, but she had no anger, no sadness, only a quiet strength that did not exist in her before. As she left the chamber, others watched from behind clear walls. Some whispered, some avoided her gaze, but a few looked at her differently, not with judgment, but with curiosity, like her steps were leading to a place they had never dared to imagine. Meanwhile, Daniel remained in his habitat, unsure of what would happen. He had spent the last few days walking alone, revisiting the garden, the lab, the quiet places they once shared. He carried her presence in his memory. Every word, every look, every touch still alive inside him. He wondered if she would return, if the walls of her world would let her pass through, or if she would disappear like a dream after waking. But late that evening, the door opened, and there she was, her figure standing in the dim light, her face calm, but her eyes full of something deeper than before. Daniel stood quickly. He stepped forward. Not to question, not to demand, just to be close. You came back, he said. Only for a moment, she replied. I had to see you before I leave. So they are sending you away. Yes, to another place for more questions, for more control. But I am not afraid anymore. Daniel reached for her hand. She took it without pause. Their fingers closed together, not as strangers, not as researcher and subject, but as something more, something honest. What will happen to us? He asked. I do not know, Lyra said, but I know what we shared was real, and I know I want to carry it with me wherever I go. Daniel nodded. He understood her words, even the ones she did not say. He looked at her with eyes that had waited a long time for this kind of truth. Will you remember this? He asked. Every moment, she replied, not as data, but as feeling. Outside, the wind began to move. The leaves in the garden danced under the soft light. The air felt warmer, softer, like the planet itself was listening. Lyra stepped closer. Her hand touched his face gently, her eyes steady. May I try something? She asked. Anything. She leaned forward slowly. Her lips met his, not with force, not with fear, but with trust. Her first kiss was not perfect, not practiced, but it carried more meaning than any word she had ever spoken. When they pulled away, she rested her head on his shoulder. They stood together, without time, without pressure, without need to explain. The next morning she was gone, her room empty, her scent faint in the air. Daniel walked through the habitat in silence, not with sadness, but with peace. He knew she had left because she had to, not because she wanted to. He returned to his work, but nothing felt the same. The machines, the reports, the quiet walks, all reminded him of her. Change had begun, not just inside him, not just inside her, but across the entire station. Other Valerians had started asking questions, softer questions, deeper questions. They no longer avoided eye contact. Some began to sit closer. Some began to speak with feeling, not just logic. One day, a message arrived, not from command, not from any official channel, but from Lyra herself. It was short but clear. I have not forgotten. Daniel smiled. He placed the message near the small plant they once cared for together. The flower was blooming again, stronger, brighter, as if it too had chosen to feel. And somewhere across the stars, Lyra stood before a new council, with the same calm voice, with the same steady hands, ready to speak. Not just about what she had learned, but about what she had felt. She was no longer just a part of the system. She was a voice rising within it, and that voice carried the echo of a human heart, a new beginning. The ship hovered above the landing platform, quiet and smooth, its metal skin reflecting the soft morning light. People moved around in silence, preparing for departure. Daniel stood among them, but his thoughts were far away. His eyes watched the sky, but his mind was searching for someone. Not in the crowd, not in the air, but in the space between memories and hope. Had almost given up the idea that she would come back. It had been weeks since her message. Short but full of meaning. She had not forgotten. Those words had stayed with him like a whisper that never faded, a touch that never left his skin. He looked down at the bag in his hand, packed and ready. His assignment was complete. Earth was calling him home, but his heart was still waiting, still holding on to a promise made in the rain, made in silence, made in truth. Then he heard footsteps, light and familiar, not rushed but sure. He turned slowly, and there she was, standing at the edge of the platform. Lyra, dressed in simple travel clothes, her face calm, her eyes steady, her presence real. Daniel did not speak at first. He just walked toward her until they were close enough to feel the warmth between them. Not a word passed between them, yet everything was said. "You are here," he finally said, his voice low. "Yes, I chose to come," she replied. "They allowed me to visit Earth as part of a cultural exchange, but this time I made the request not for study, not for command, for myself." Daniel nodded, his heart full, not just with joy, but with something deeper: respect, understanding, connection. "Did they question your reason?" he asked. "They did," Lyra answered, "but I gave them my truth. I told them that understanding humans cannot be complete without understanding emotion, and that emotion cannot be learned from a distance." And they listened. Some did, not all, but some enough for change to begin. Daniel smiled, not because the battle was over, but because it had begun, and she had chosen to lead it. They walked toward the ship side by side, not as guest and host, not as teacher and student, but as equals, two souls who had found something rare in each other. As they boarded the ship, Lyra looked around at the human design, the colors, the shapes, the smells. All different from Valari, yet nothing felt strange. Everything felt possible inside the ship. They found their seats together. The window beside them showed the endless sky, ready to open like a page in a book yet to be written. Daniel looked at her, his voice soft and honest. "Are you ready?" "No," she said, "but I want to try." He took her hand, not to comfort, not to protect, but to share. And she accepted it, not with doubt, but with peace. The ship rose slowly, leaving the platform, leaving Valari, leaving behind a chapter that had changed them both, not with noise, not with war, but with quiet moments that carried more weight than time. As the stars appeared outside the window, Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closed, her heart open for the first time. She was not running from confusion. She was walking toward, feeling toward, understanding, toward herself. Daniel looked out at the stars, then at her. He knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something rare and beautiful, a connection not written in data or rules, but in shared silence and chosen presence. Back on Valari, things were already shifting. Young observers asked new kinds of questions. Discussions opened that had once been forbidden. A small group formed, quietly inspired by Lyra's words. They studied emotion, not as weakness, but as experience, not as threat, but as part of life. Council did not stop them. They watched, unsure but curious. The world was not changing fast, but it was changing like the first drop of rain before a storm, gentle but unstoppable on Earth. Daniel and Lyra began a quiet life, among people who laughed, who cried, who hugged without reason, who lived with open hearts. Lyra watched them. She listened, she asked, but not like before. Now she felt. She walked through markets holding Daniel's hand, tasted food without asking about its nutritional value, listened to music that made her close. Her eyes danced once, even though her steps were unsure and awkward. Each day, she wrote her thoughts. Not in code, not in reports, just in words for herself, words like joy, comfort, longing, warmth. She began speaking at cultural centers, sharing her story, not as a lecture, but as a journey. People listened, people cried, people hugged her, and for the first time she hugged them back. Daniel watched her grow, not away from him, but beside him. Every step, every change shared, every discovery made together. One evening, as they sat by the water watching the sky turn orange, she turned to him and asked, "Do you think we were meant to meet?" "I think we chose to meet," Daniel said. "I think every step we took led us here, not by force, but by choice." Lyra smiled, a real smile full of quiet fire. She leaned against him and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me. You taught me too," he replied, how to see the world again with new eyes. They sat in silence, not needing more words. The wind soft, the water calm, the stars waiting above, two beings from different worlds, Now no longer strangers, not defined by planets or species, but by something far greater, the will to understand, the courage to feel, and the power to choose. And in that choice they found what neither of them had expected: home. The end.